if you recognise a need in your own child, or you know one of your children has a particular area they want to get involved with in the future, what they want to be, what you do is you facilitate that child becoming the person that they've been called to be, right? Fulfilling their potential. So they're great with art or something like that. So you get them into art classes, you don't actually do the artwork for them.
Wow.
You facilitate them becoming what they want to be, right? So if we can do the same as organisations, find out what it is that these people can be, want to do, need, and then facilitate that to happen.
Welcome to Justice Matters, the podcast inspiring a world where everyone belongs. I'm your host, Tim Buxton. Today on the podcast, we have Jill Lovell. Now, she is a passionate educator who, for the good part of 20 years, has spent her life in Mozambique, Africa, empowering and educating in some of the most poorest, disenfranchised communities. She's overseen various programs providing education with a number of organisations, and for the last 7 years has been with Mission Educate, overseeing their primary, secondary, and tertiary education programs. She came back to Australia for a brief visit in March 2020, and as you know, COVID has meant that she has now been in Australia since then, and she's turned herself to some study now. She's with QUT not only as a teacher but also as a student, working on her master's and post-doctoral work. She has a wealth of not only knowledge but experience. And as we talk about the role of education in justice work, man, I learned so much, and I know you will too. It is a privilege and an honour to share the conversation that I had just today with Jill Lovell. Jill, thank you so much for coming into the studio for an episode on Justice Matters. I really appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having me. I've listened to a few episodes, so I'm very excited to be a part of it.
Cool. We've just got done with a lovely coffee and breakfast, chatting for already a couple of hours. So I hope we've got enough left in the tank to kind of keep this conversation going.
I'm certainly someone with a lot of words, so I think we'll be okay.
That's so good. Well, yeah, again, it's been, I feel like I've known you for a long time already, and we've got some great mutual friends, and we're also studying together at QUT. You're actually a teacher as well as studying. Can you explain a bit about what you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. I started a Master in Philosophy in the middle of last year, so I'm 6 months into my research degree, and this semester I'm also tutoring on a subject called Responsible Enterprise in the Master of Business.
Wow, you got your hands full. And you're also involved in the non-profit work that you've been a part of for the most part of 20 years. You've been in Mozambique with a few organisations, and for the last, 7 years?
Yep. Yeah, 7 years.
Yeah, you've been with an organisation called Mission Educate in Mozambique, and so you've still got a bit of involvement there. Tell us about, you came back to Australia like right on time, right? Right before
Some
COVID.
Would say right on time, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I arrived on the 15th of March last year, so just before they brought in the home quarantine, I think it was, like a few hours literally before that happened. I came back originally for a couple of weeks, and 1 year later, I'm still here. So it's been not quite the year that I planned or anyone planned, I think, but managed to find some things to do.
Yeah. And do you are? I mean, to think that you've thrown yourself into a master's program and teaching, and I'm sure itchy feet still to try and get back to Mozambique and to get on the ground as well.
Absolutely, Tim. Yeah, as I said, I only planned to be back here for maybe a month at that time, but found myself stuck in Australia. It's hard to say stuck in Australia because
I know.
It's been such a great experience to be here for the last year compared to many countries around the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, my intention was just to go back. I had all my things. I took just a small suitcase to Australia. My home was there. So I've still got things now spread out amongst a few different friends' houses and had to let go of my rental there. But I hope to get back there sometime. I'm still working part-time with Mission Educate, overseeing our programs and projects on the ground there.
Well, I mean, I'd love to really get into a bit about your work and the vast experience I think you really bring, even coming into some of your master's program and things that you're passionate about. But it kind of, we were just having a little chat before we press record about the impact of COVID. I've been in Queensland this whole time, and the experience as a Queenslander to someone in Victoria, in Melbourne, that has gone through COVID is completely different. I'd love to get your kind of insight a little bit about how some of the developing world and countries like Mozambique and other people, in fact, are just are wrestling and struggling with the impacts of COVID.
Sure, yeah. So, the country where I've been living in is Mozambique. It's in southern Africa. Many people may not have heard of it, but may know South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia. They're all surrounding Mozambique. It's on the coast.
Yeah.
So there, very quickly, everything got shut down. People were asked to wear masks all the time. Schools were closed for about 7 months of 2020, which was really difficult for us in Mission Educate because we're an educational organisation. So our school, our TAFE and other programs were all closed for that entire time, which was hard on us, hard on our students. We implemented some online courses, and WhatsApp was our means of communication with our students, tried a bit of Google Classroom and other means of communicating with students. But it was a very challenging time, and still is actually, with the South African variant of the virus.
Yeah.
At Christmas time, there was a lot of travel between various countries in Southern Africa, and that variant came into Mozambique, and there's been quite a number of deaths in the last few months, including the mayor of the city where I used to live.
Way.
Yeah, he passed away last week, which was tragic.
Oh, man.
For everybody, for his family and for the city as a whole.
Yeah.
It's really impacted people across the board. And we've had some of our students lose parents to COVID-19. I'm not aware of any of our actual students being affected yet, but it's certainly not over in many parts of the world.
Yeah. And, it kind of, it's hard to kind of be grateful enough, to be honest, being here in Australia. Our family came back in January before anyone really even sneezed. And so it really wasn't, on the scene. But then to be here in Australia, to see how it's impacting so many other people, economically, the challenges people have. But, we were talking about, if it's hard for us to relate, if it's hard for me to relate to someone in Melbourne, let's say, for example, who's had to be on lockdown for months, who's really, maybe their job is just completely got decimated because of the lockdown, and, the ripple effects that has on people's lives. How much more is it difficult for us to even relate?
Absolutely. Yes,
to someone overseas.
Totally. I think it's very, very difficult to relate to somebody if you've not been there and seen or experienced the same thing as they have. But all of us, I think, can learn to have some empathy and compassion for somebody else and try and listen and hear the experience of others, be that around coronavirus or any situation in their lives, that if we stop and listen to somebody else and what they're going through or what they've been through, it helps us have some understanding and then perhaps relate to them in a slightly different way in the future.
So step one, get yourself in a situation where you're actually sitting down and meeting with somebody that is different from you, or who has experienced great suffering or great injustice or great pain in their life. Like, find yourself in a situation where you're able to have a conversation or to meet
exactly, and listen
person to person.
Yeah, ask questions. And I think I don't know if we want to go down this track, Tim, but both of us are white Australians, and we can often not have an understanding of what somebody from another race might experience just in their day-to-day life. But if each one of us can sit down with somebody and just say, hey, tell me your experience. Tell me what your day-to-day life is like. Tell me some of the situations that you've been in. And I think we were talking before, Tim, that if you look someone in the eyes and sit down and talk to them and they talk to you and tell you their experience, just to dismiss it and say, no, that can't be true, is much, much harder than, say, on social media to just diss what somebody else is saying. But to put yourself in a position where you're able to hear and listen what somebody else is going through, I would hope gives us some understanding, and it's from understanding that we can actually relate and bring some change, positive change in our world.
So well said. And that was what I was going to say. Step 2 is, so put yourself in that position. Secondly, when you are in that position, instead of having an opinion, instead of being the one talking, I've always, been reminded, we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right?
Exactly.
Like, we should do twice as much, if not more, listening than we do speaking and really learning. And you've been in that situation where you've lived for the most of your adult life in another culture, which it's not just the verbal, observable cultural differences. There's the unspoken cultural differences. There's the deep-seated, like, this is who we are, and I just have that being from this part of the world or being growing up in this culture that you have to learn and understand, that takes decades. How is that kind of, how is like living in that experience and, from the vantage point of trying to provide education and empowerment amongst disadvantaged people, how important has that been to have that posture, to have that kind of approach to what you do?
Really important, of course. I think one of the great advantages of putting yourself in another culture or a situation that you're not familiar with is you can see your own culture and your own normal for when you're in it.
Yes.
To say to Australians that you guys should be grateful, because so many people around the world don't have what you have, unless those Australians can step out and step into something else and see, okay, actually this is what's different. This is how I see the world. This is the experience that I've had. It's very difficult to do it from inside.
You can't do it.
No. So I've had the great advantage of stepping out of my culture and stepping into another culture, living in another culture for a very long time, and making that transition back and forth between the two, which is not easy. The first time I went to Mozambique, I went for about a year and a half, about 18 months. And I went on a one-way ticket. I was, I think, 23.
Yeah.
My parents were not thrilled with that decision, of course. But, I immersed myself in the culture there. And when I came back to Australia, I found it very, very difficult to reconcile what I'd experienced and the differences in, not, as you say, not just the outward poverty, but the way people live and the differences in our values, I think, particularly around the individualistic culture we have in Australia and the communal culture that you might see in many other parts of the world. So stepping back into Australian culture and having to accept that this culture is also valid and this culture is also a way of doing things. It's not necessarily all right and all wrong.
Right. It's not black and white.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. And then being able to go between two different worlds in some ways. I have a good friend in Mozambique who used to say that when he's in America, he's American, he's in America and that's where he is. And when he's in Mozambique, he's in Mozambique and that's where he is. And to try and judge one culture based on another is not a helpful way to live. And it's not the right way to live because there are truths in all cultures. So, I've had the advantage of going back and forth and being able to draw on the best of both worlds in some ways.
I love you've got to throw yourself in that situation, like you said, quite often. And we can do it here in Australia. We don't have to go overseas. I mean, the work that I'm involved in with You Belong, there's former refugees that have now resettled in Australia. They've been here for less than 6 months, or a year now with the restrictions of people coming in. And yet, they're a part of our culture. They're welcomed here, and there's opportunities. If you're in a larger city, a capital city in Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane, you're going to be surrounded. Even here on the Gold Coast, we are a multicultural nation. There's so many opportunities we have to just our neighbours, for goodness sake, and that's the hardest thing, isn't it? We don't do very well. Kind of like we drive into our driveways and we say hi to our neighbour and wave, but do we really know them? Do we really know our neighbour? Do we really know those that aren't just a part of our social group that we all kind of might have a lot of in common with, which is natural to kind of surround yourself with the people that are like you, but you don't have to go overseas. One of the things I found at least when I spent time living abroad was it's humbling, right?
Absolutely. That's the word that I was thinking about. Is
you don't know the language.
Yeah.
You're constantly making mistakes. You're constantly misreading something, and you just feel like you're just shooting yourself in the foot time and time again. And until someone graciously reminds you, I lived in New York for almost 10 years, and that's a culture in and of itself, and you'll learn quickly that.
Yeah, so think about for all of those that have come to Australia as refugees or as, in other forms as migrants, and what you have felt when you go into this other culture is what they are feeling coming here.
100%.
Even knowing, I have a good friend from Mozambique who spent a few years in Australia doing her master's on a scholarship. And even understanding the rubbish bin system here, she had to ask, Jill, what are these rubbish bins and what do I do and where do you put your rubbish and that kind of, there's so many things that are different about cultures. And if we, as Australians, are able to help somebody else as they come to our country to understand the way things work here and understand the way things may work where they come from, I think we can have some really deep and rich culture within our shores here.
Yeah, 100%. We got so much. There's so much richness. There's so much to experience. Just in our own neighbourhoods.
Yeah.
We're certainly missing out when we kind of don't step out, put ourselves in those situations. What you shared kind of reminded me of this experience of this one girl from I don't know, she was from Africa. I don't know which country she was from, but she was sitting in the lunchroom of the office that she was working at. She'd only recently come over, and everyone would be like, "Why do you eat lunch alone all the time in the lunchroom? We ask you to come out to lunch, and you always politely say no, it's okay." And after a while of this happening, she was, really alone and didn't really feel like she was being accepted by that staff community. And, she's like, you only ever asked me one time, right? Mm-hmm. In this culture, you always refuse the first time. Right. No, it's okay. Yeah. It's usually by the third time, maybe even the second time, if you're brave, that the offer is extended, that you would then say, I would love to. Yes, I'd go. So because of this cultural, difference of her wanting to be polite and refuse, the initial invitation.
Wow. Everyone was missing out.
Everyone was missing out.
Wow.
And that's just one tiny little example of just some of the challenges there are. Empathy, understanding, again, humility, being humble, being curious, not judging when we see something different.
Yeah, exactly.
We're analysing and judging most of the time.
Yeah, and we can become uncomfortable, right, when we're in a situation where we don't really know what the protocols are. Right. So it's much easier just to stick to what you know and your way of doing things. But there is so much to be gained by building relationship across cultures, across various social groups that you may not, have mixed in before, but you can learn so much, and everyone can offer so much to the people around them if you step outside a little bit of where you normally are. I think there's so much to be gained.
Let me tell you about one of our partners, Freedom Broadband. They're an incredible profit-for-purpose business. Freedom Broadband is your all-in-one internet and telephone service provider, whether it's for your business or your home. Now, their internet connection and speeds are simply amazing, and they're in another league when it comes to the quality of their customer service. But here's what really sets them apart. When you switch to any of their services, they'll donate $5 every month to a non-profit cause of your choice. As the founder of You Belong, an Australian-based non-profit charity, one of the greatest challenges we face is fundraising. And I think I can speak for almost all leaders in the non-profit world when I say that being able to have a residual income coming into your accounts to support your work is a dream come true. And like most non-profits, our work is dependent on the generous support of individuals and groups that share our passion to empower refugees to integrate and thrive here in Australia. What that means is that we spend more time and energy looking for ways to raise support, and what I desperately love to be doing is spending that time and our limited resources developing and growing the many successful programs that we run. But here's where our friends at Freedom Broadband come in. You see, a few months back, I was on a 4G wireless connection at home through one of the largest phone and internet companies here in Australia. And each month I was nervous about going over our usage, getting a nasty bill at the end, and I was working on a lot of the podcasting and videos at home, and the speeds I was getting were just painfully debilitating. And I finally decided to give Freedom Broadband a call, and within 2 minutes I was on the call with Graham completing my application, and within a week I had completely switched over to their $79 a month unlimited plan, and I can tell you firsthand, the service has been phenomenal, and I have a direct line to their customer service team whenever I have a question or need assistance. Now the studio and office where I work has switched over to Freedom Broadband as well. We're on their business plan and we haven't looked back. And how cool is this? Little by little, connection by connection, Aussie-owned and locally run Freedom Broadband is now actively supporting the great work of non-profits in communities all around Australia. Simply by switching your internet to Freedom Broadband, you can help transform the lives of those less fortunate. And that's why I love these guys. And get this, head to freedombroadband.com.au and quote Justice Matters on your application form, and they will donate $50 from the activation fee to support Justice Matters. That's going to enable us to continue this podcast and inspire the world where everyone belongs. That's freedombroadband.com.au. Say goodbye to expensive, mediocre internet with poor customer service, and hello to top-notch internet service and the good feeling of knowing you're supporting a great cause. Join Freedom Broadband today. Quote Justice Matters, and let's partner together with the internet that's helping to change the world. Yeah, and this is just for the extroverts, right?
Absolutely.
That love to step out. In fact, when you talk about listening and learning, well, it's most often the introverts in the room,
sure.
right, that are the most effective at doing that well.
I think it's interesting, Tim. When I first felt called to go to Mozambique, I was quite young. I'd always felt that I should go to Africa from when I was very young, be a missionary there. And then as I was at university, I started asking God, all right, where in Africa should I go? Because Africa's a big place. You can't just get on a plane and go to Africa.
Sure.
Some people may not know that, but you can't. There's many, many countries in Africa. So I started asking God where I should go. And it's one of the few times where I felt like there was an experience, right, of God showing me something and showing me a map. And pointing to Mozambique. So I looked at Mozambique and they speak Portuguese there. They don't speak English. It was the poorest country in the world at the time.
Wow.
And I really felt the first few years I was there, God put me in a place where they don't speak English, so I would have to learn and listen because my natural tendency would be to come in and say, okay, this is what we can do to fix these problems. This is, my way of doing things, but I couldn't communicate my way of doing things or what I knew. I had to sit back and first of all learn the language, learn the culture, learn how things were done to then be able to offer anything of myself. So that was a big challenge, but I think the right thing for me.
The great humiliator and humbler language and not being able to be proficient in language really does make you dependent on others, which
I'm sure you've got many stories and I remember times, trying to use hand signals to communicate to somebody. You're lost in a city and I just want to get drawing in the sand, trying to figure out where to go. It is very humbling,
Yeah, wow. You mentioned this idea of wanting to be the one coming in to help and serve, and it's kind of fitting that you come in and have to be humble. But we see a lot of, and one of the things I really wanted to kind of talk with you a bit about as we kind of focus on justice and from an educator like yourself, from someone that's taking education into one of the poorest countries in the world, trying to empower and elevate those that are disadvantaged, and doing that in a way that isn't done from that traditional, hey, I've got a program that you need,
right?
And I've got the money to kind of run the program, therefore I have the main voice and the power to be able to determine how to do things. Talk, because I think this is leading into a bit about your
research,
your research, right?
Yeah.
So you're an educator, you're also now an academic and have been, and really wanting to speak into that space. I mean, talk a bit more into the importance of really coming in as a humble learner of cultures of the other,
sure,
in wanting to empower.
My research is looking at exactly that. So in my experience, we see a lot of organisations doing what you just said, of coming in and saying, we can offer some solutions to the problems you have. And often you find donors willing to give money to certain solutions to certain issues, and everyone comes in to try and help and fix something that's broken. And it's true, there's a clear need, there's a clear gap, a clear lack. What I'm interested to learn in my research is how we can ensure that the people that we're helping, that their voice is actually being heard in what the needs are and what the potential right solutions to those issues are. So how if there's an issue of a lack of water, what is the best way to bring water to that community from the point of view of the people who actually live in the community?
Sure.
If it's an issue of education, how can we see that community making the changes themselves with a bit of support from the outside, and kind of tipping it upside down and giving the power and the voice to those that are actually going to be impacted and live with the changes that are made by organisations. So I'm looking at exploring some of these issues of power dynamics across cultures, and how the voices of participants can be heard and can be communicated, how we can empower and allow space, how we can amplify the voice of those that are participants in the programs, rather than just having this loud, powerful, money-driven voice coming in and saying, this is what we can do for you.
Yeah. And well-intentioned, but at the end of the day can have quite the opposite long-term impact,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Paternalism, it builds a sense of dependency. Look, we have the power, we have the resources, you have nothing. And it reinforces this sense of, I'm weak, I'm poor.
Absolutely.
I need you. There's many ways to talk about toxic charity, or when helping hurts. There's lots of people talking around this, but And
there's also, I think, the kind of tokenistic, let's hear from the participants what they thought of the program that we offered them. And
right.
Yeah, thanks very much. It was great, but could there have been a better way?
Yes.
And it comes back, I think, Tim, to what we were saying about humility. whether that's as an individual going to another individual person in building relationship, or whether that's as an organization trying to help a community. We need some humility to come in and say, okay, I probably, or we may not know the best way to assist in this culture, to assist you guys to make the changes that need to be made. So let us learn and listen from you, and perhaps we might have to change our strategy. Perhaps we might have to rewrite the program that we originally planned, or maybe we totally scrap that and say what's actually needed is something else that the community is talking about, which, it does require humility from us to say, okay, we may not have all of the answers.
I find that fascinating because you might be missing the golden opportunity to have an impact in a community because you're stuck in your own way of thinking and doing things, which has been concocted and developed in some other country, some faraway place that you're just trying to dump somewhere else, right? And you could be missing the most valuable resources. When you say humility, it makes me think of, we like to throw away the term empowerment around. And empowerment means the person with power in a traditional sense has to give up their power to give it.
Allow somebody else to
somebody else without, right?
Yeah.
So that could be intellect, you have the ideas, not just me. You have the insight.
Yeah, I think we can even extend it a little bit to say that everybody can still have some power in there's kind of almost infinite power, and we each draw on the power. So in some contexts, some people draw on so much power that nobody else gets a chance to use theirs, or they don't know how, they haven't ever had the opportunity to grasp some of that power for themselves. But if those of us that are often powerful in the situation can let go a bit or show somebody else, all right, you also can have a voice here. You also can draw on the power in that's available. And speak your voice. And I'm just going to let go a bit.
Yes.
Not use up so much of what's around, and let somebody else share. And as we allow people to express their voice and be heard, it does build some confidence and some self-esteem to be able to say, all right, well, not only can I express what the needs are, but perhaps I can also be a part of making the change and bringing a solution to the situation.
Have there been any experiences or situations that come to mind where you've kind of seen like an aha moment within a group that you've worked with where they've kind of, been empowered to start something or to do something
I think
themselves?
For me, like a lot of my role over the years in organisations has been not so much directly with groups of communities, but with staff who are working with those communities. And in a Mozambican culture, there's very much a top-down chief hierarchical culture. So you would always just do what you're told, and you don't ever step outside of doing what you're told. Whereas I've tried to create an environment for staff where they can give things a go and they can come up with some ideas and innovation, and they say, I need to do this particular thing. Oh, well, you go away and work out what you want to do and come back to me. And that's where I think I see staff thrive, because they've been given some power to make decisions for themselves about how they want to do their job. And at the end of the day, when you have the power, you also have the ownership, right, of the situation. And so they take responsibility then. When you're an owner, you have responsibility. If you're just like a renter, you kind of let things go. But if you have ownership of something, then you have responsibility for it. And I've found that this is probably in any work situation, if you give people the opportunity to take ownership of the role they're doing, then they have the responsibility for it, and you don't have to be chasing them to try and do their job. No. They're saying, okay, this is mine. I want to make sure that I do what's mine well. And that's been really encouraging to see a shift in culture within our team, which can be quite difficult when you're trying to bring in a different culture to, say, the societal culture.
Right. It's almost like a third culture.
Yeah.
There's maybe
That's
the,
right.
the culture that you've come from, which is Western culture, let's say, then there's the Mozambican culture, but you're trying to forge hey, look, there's an organizational culture maybe.
Let's draw on the best
Yeah.
of all of these, and let's try and create a culture where everyone can thrive. Be that in a family,
Yes.
or in a classroom,
Yes.
or in a work situation. Let's not just say one way is the right way, but let's allow everybody to express
Right.
their voice and see if we can create something really cool.
And it kind of comes back to that that value of there isn't just one way. There isn't just there's this a humility to say, hey, there it's not black and white. Maybe I've got something to learn here. Maybe there's another way to do things. I love your phrase, infinite power. I mean, the thought that, hey, there's infinite possibilities and infinite ways we can tap into, the solution, and we all have something to bring. We all have something to offer.
Yeah, and I think for me coming, I'm a Christian, and often I think in Christian culture there is black and white, there is a right and a wrong, and so when you start to talk about perhaps there's other ways of doing things, people start to get quite uncomfortable. We're not talking about whether there's right and wrong, whether there, from a moralistic
point.
Point of
we
view.
were talking earlier, right? Like about, we like to point out in maybe cultures where bribery or some form of nepotism seems very obvious and apparent in a culture, and it can often be in an Eastern culture where honor or shame or this sense of obligation to your family kind of supersedes from a moral level the duty that you have to preserve the honor within your family can supersede some of the more, what we would say lying or cheating or black and white kind of things. But we can easily judge another culture without, like you said,
looking at our own.
We're oblivious to take a phrase of Jesus, right? A plank in our own eye. And the nepotism that exists in our Western culture, and the corruption that exists in our government, and the systemic injustices that exist in our systems.
Yeah, absolutely. We can just ignore it, can't we?
We can.
Because that's our way of doing things. And I think we've blurred, say, coming back to Christian culture, we've blurred what's Western and what's Christian or biblical, and they've become one and the same. And so when we try and take a Christian culture somewhere, we take a Western culture, but can we separate that out and say, okay, what of this is just Christian, and what is actually what is the Word of God? And
what I mean, let's take it. Hey, if we're going to be honest, at what's colonialistic in its nature, what's very imperialistic in its nature. Because quite a lot is diametrically opposed. So I would say if you would call yourself a Christian, is diametrically opposed to the way of Jesus.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anyway, we could go a whole another.
Some people might turn us off soon too if we go too far down this.
But hey, this is I guess what this is about, having honest conversations.
Yeah. And for me, I think I would encourage all of us to just at least ask those questions.
Yeah.
To stop and say to yourself, okay, the way I do this, or the way I think about this, or the way I treat certain people, is this really the right way, or is this just the way that I was taught? Is my culture, and perhaps is colonial, or just stop and ask some questions. Yeah.
Again, humility. I'd love to talk a bit about your research that you're moving into, in particular providing healthy and helpful and evaluation of organisations that are doing work. Can you kind of elaborate a bit more on what your goals are?
I think it's about trying to find ways of communication and dialogue at the end of the day between organisations and the people that they're serving. an organization might come to a community and see some needs, but how can we ensure that the people in that community are having their voice heard, are able to express their voice, and are able to communicate back to the organization? How can the organization and the community work together really as one to solve the issues that might exist? And how can the organizations learn from the people that they're serving? How can we see some changes in the power imbalances that exist, in the imbalances of voice as well? That how can we amplify the voice of the beneficiaries, I might call them, or participants of programs, and have organizations truly serving the needs of the community? Yeah, we both work with nonprofit organizations, and there's a finite amount of money. There might be an infinite amount of power, but there's a finite amount of money and resource available. So don't we want to make sure that that small bit of resource we have is going to make the biggest difference and the best difference, the right impact, meet the real needs, and not just the needs that somebody has perceived.
Right.
Or that, on the surface level, a community might see a particular need, but let's work together and dig deep to say what is the best way to make change and improve the situation with and for a community.
And for most people that are involved in this kind of work, they've got an awesome heart.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're a helper. They just want to serve. They just want to do something. They're volunteering their time. They're giving their money, their energy, their effort. And so it's not discounting the fact that there aren't people that want to roll up their sleeves and get something done. But so often we can rush into trying to help and rush into trying to do and run programs, and I've got this idea and I've got that. What you're saying is, what if you just kind of took a deep breath, which is just so hard for the doers out there, right? It's so hard for the helpers out there, right? And there's a time, right? Emergencies, we see how Aussies come together and volunteer and serve whenever an emergency strikes, the bushfires. And even in COVID, we've seen volunteer in Queensland and other organisations that accept volunteers. People just come and serve, and we see loads of churches get involved, and just all organisations, Rotary. We've done so many partnerships with people. Not discounting all of that, but what you're saying is you want to make sure you're actually helping. Yeah. You really actually are helping, right?
That's right.
And if we were, as an organisation or as an individual, right, wanting to serve a community that's disenfranchised, disadvantaged, if I would actually say the biggest asset and resource is that actual person,
absolutely,
rather than what I can get for them. And if I were to take the time, bringing back to what we started talking about, listening and learning and mining and empowering and amplifying that greatest asset that is before me,
absolutely,
how much better off would be doing,
Yeah, to facilitate the change that they need and want for themselves.
Yes.
I'm not a parent, Tim, but I see many children. I'm a teacher.
Yes.
And you're a parent. So if you recognize a need in your own child, or one of your children has a particular area they want to get involved with in the future, what they want to be, what you do is you facilitate that child becoming the person that they've been called to be, right? Fulfilling their potential. So they're great with art or something like that. So you get them into art classes. You don't actually do the artwork for them.
Wow.
You facilitate them becoming what they want to be, right? So if we can do the same as organizations, find out what it is that these people can be, want to do, need, and then facilitate that to happen. Coming back to Jesus again, being that servant and coming along and beside and behind even, and not coming on top and down, but just being that little hand behind, saying, yep, I can help push you along in the direction that you need to go, that perhaps there's quite a lot of barriers in front of you stopping you from getting there.
Right.
But my role is actually to help you overcome those barriers and get through that course, not be there at the end or just pick you up and drop you there or do it for you.
true leadership, I heard is said, is going in front and removing all the obstacles out of the way of those who you're called to lead.
Wow.
Right? Like, how can I clear the runway so you can take off?
Yeah.
Right? How can I facilitate, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that you can actually do everything that's inside of you. And that requires, I believe, and have like a sense of believing in them and having dignity.
And putting in people what will enable them to overcome any obstacles that they might face along the way. Like we won't always be there to take the obstacle out of the way.
True.
So how can we help people know that they actually can overcome it themselves, and putting the skills and the resilience or what's needed in them to walk that journey that they have, for the rest of their lives. We don't know how long as leaders we're involved in somebody's life.
Right.
And so let's take the opportunity while we're with them to
teach them
and walk with them for part of their journey, and walk humbly with them.
Wow, that's phenomenal. That's why I think education is so key to justice.
Absolutely.
Because education it's teaching somebody, like you said, not removing for them the obstacles, kind of my short-sighted analogy, but it's taking it that step further and saying, I am actually going to empower you to be able to remove the obstacle yourself, because you're going to be on your own one day. Kind of to take that idea of facilitating for your own kids. Well, you want to do it to the point where they're going to be adults one day, and they're going to be on their own, right? And they don't need you interfering and making things possible. You've hopefully done a good enough job equipping them. And education is that, because when you don't educate, it's like you're keeping someone in the dark. My morning routine is a bit of a meditation in a cold pool, and I thoroughly enjoy that, and I definitely recommend trying getting into an ice cold bath in the morning.
My goodness.
And as I was listening, I listened to kind of like a spoken word poet actually at the moment named David White, and he was talking about language and how language often is, we teach language as an abstract thing like glass, but when we first learn language is it's something we experience and encounter, rather than just an abstract thing like on, putting a sticker on everything and just naming it. It's something that we've experienced, and that's another way language is powerful. Now, it reminded me of the first word my daughter spoke English word my daughter spoke when we were living in Kurdistan region of Iraq. And the word was power, because every day we would literally have power for like 5 hours a day, and then we'd go on this like really low power generator for another like 10 hours of the day. But quite often, it was always around like dinner time, we'd have no power. Drove my wife crazy because she's trying to cook and you don't have power, and it's getting dark, and you just got, like flashlights everywhere. But every time the lights would come on, we would all scream wherever we were in the house. Power! It was just this like epiphany every day that we'd have. And we remember the lights came on, and suddenly my daughter said, power, and again, this idea of language and an experience. But to take it to kind of where I'm going with that is when you don't educate someone, you're keeping them in the dark. You're not allowing them to have that light bulb moment of, aha, I know this. I'm not just teaching someone memory and rote and they're not experiencing. And when you do education properly, you are empowering somebody.
And everyone has the ability to have the aha moment, right? Everyone
100%.
has the capacity to learn. And I think, it's just because of a lack of education, a lack of opportunity that people may not be where they could be.
Where their potential is.
Yeah.
They're kept in the dark,
Yep.
The dark ages we call it, and it's for lack of wanting to see others succeed.
Absolutely.
Others, it's so much easier to kind of like keep people subservient to us. We hold on to power, control when others aren't.
Yeah.
That must be so challenging in a country like Mozambique, which has for so long been just seen as from the outside.
Yeah, so Mozambique around education has had a really challenging history. Mozambique was colonized by the Portuguese.
Yeah.
And there's a horrific history of the way local Mozambicans were treated, and they weren't allowed to go to school above grade 3.
No way.
For many years. So it wasn't until the 60s where there was a war between the Mozambicans and the Portuguese. The Portuguese were kicked out of the country.
Wow.
But then Mozambique went straight into a civil war for more than 20 years. So there was generations and generations that did not receive any education, and then decades of war where it was almost impossible to get an education because people were hiding in the bush from the war. So it wasn't really until the mid-90s when there started to be some education happening across the country. And so we have whole generations of people.
You've only have a few
literate.
decades.
Yeah, so one of our key programs at Mission Educate is an adult literacy program.
Wow.
Teaching adults who missed the opportunity, women who didn't have the opportunity to go to school, young, when I say young, like maybe in their 30s, guys who were, because of the war, didn't get a chance to go to school. So teaching them to read and write, and empowering them then to go on with what it is they want to do with their life. And I remember asking some of the women early on, like, why are you in this course? And they would often talk about the humiliation that comes with being illiterate. Like, women would say, like, I go to a building and there's a sign that says do not enter, but I can't read it. So I go in somewhere and then people laugh at me because I'm not meant to be there. Or, I just they can't read. That's something I never even thought of.
Wow.
Or, there's a form they need to sign and they can't even sign their own name, so they have to do a fingerprint, and it's quite humiliating to say, I can't even write my own name. So for them it was about self-confidence and empowerment of themselves to be able to be a part of the society that was going on around them, rather than being excluded just because they couldn't read and write. So I think education is hugely important for justice and for communities.
Dignity.
Absolutely.
I mean, that person has immense value, and because of the circumstances beyond their control, they aren't afforded the human dignity that they deserve to function in the society that they're in.
Yeah, and I think for me that's part of why I went in the first place. I recognise now, perhaps I didn't back then, but I had the opportunity of a great education.
Yeah.
And why me? Why do I get that and somebody else, just because of where they're born, doesn't? To me, that doesn't seem just or fair or right. So if I can, why not help somebody else access the education that will enable them to do what it is they want to do with their life?
I think anybody that wants to get involved in serving needs to spend a couple hours with you. Probably learn from your own mistakes and your own learnings along the way. But we have so much. We've been so privileged. We have so much. And there is that sense of responsibility that you carry that I think the entire Western world really, to a certain degree, there's a responsibility we have to really serve and to come alongside those, not out of a sense, again, of paternalism, you need me, but in a sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm always just very much passionate about displaced people, and I think of the very reasons that people are displaced today are because of quite often Western intervention and the developed world through climate change, through famines and droughts, greed and capitalism and oil and mining and all these colonialism, right?
Yeah.
Expansion, right? We see the effects that
Absolutely.
have often, and war then that results, right? It's humanity's fault collectively. Yes, we are our own. But when we see the ways are implicated in the displacement of people around the world, we have a responsibility
Absolutely.
to do something about it, but not just do it from our vantage point, but like you said, like do it in a way that prioritizes the beneficiaries that you're serving.
Yeah. The one advantage, Tim, of learning another language is you get a different perspective on certain things. And in the Bible, it talks about justice, right? In our English Bibles, the word justice is often talked about as righteousness,
Yes.
right? Especially in the New Testament. We read a lot about righteousness. Now, in Portuguese, there isn't a word of righteousness. It's all justice, justiça.
Wow.
And if you start to read some of those passages where it uses the word righteousness, if you replace that with the word justice, I think you'll get a slightly different perspective on what justice is.
I love that.
So to me, like, righteousness is quite a personal, internal thing, right? You know, being righteous and right with God. Whereas justice has a much more outward and societal, communal slant to it, in my understanding. I think our kind of English understanding. So for me, learning that in Portuguese, that let's not do away with personally being right with God, but let's put that aside for a minute, and where we see righteousness, let's see it as justice. And let's not take it away from all being about me personally with God, or me personally, internally, and let's take it a bit more external and think about justice and think about the people around me and thinking about being right, not just with God, but with everybody around me, helping those people as well find justice and a right relationship with God. I think it really helped change my perspective on what justice
truly
and righteousness is. Yeah, what it truly is.
Wow. So good. I think we could draw so many more analogies. You've made me think of whenever Jesus spoke about loving God, he often said it actually looks like loving your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
It actually looks like not just loving your neighbor, loving your enemy, right? And when enemy, it quite often just means someone that's different, someone that might be perceived as the other. And I love that, broadening it away from this very individualistic, me-centered, way of living to a very corporate, other-centered. And you're doing just that. I'm excited.
So are you.
I'm excited to hear about, the impact. We're lucky to have you here in Australia for this season, and I love that you're developing, investing in learning and growing and being able to be a greater resources to charities like You Belong and others out there that are trying to serve in the communities that we have here. And so look forward to hearing the findings. Are there any other ways people can kind of learn about your work or what you've done, or get in touch with you?
I'm on most of the social media.
Yeah.
I can give you that info, Tim.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I'm at the moment with Mission Educate. You can probably find missioneducate.org online.
Yeah.
But feel free to get in touch with me and explore, reaching out and
maybe joining your
people.
QT class.
For sure.
Is it too late to joining in?
Probably, but I can certainly recommend looking at ACPNS, where we're both studying and where I'm researching through. There's some great courses there, some postgrad stuff that you're doing, Tim, and I'm doing a Master of Philosophy at the moment. There's other courses you can access there, and the whole team there are a really useful resource for anyone working with not-for-profits or fundraising or anything to do with organisations. Definitely get in touch with us.
They're brilliant. Ruth, Craig, Wendy, there's so many on that team that are phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yeah. Oh, it's good. Well, thanks so much again.
Thanks for having me.
catching up, and all the best with all that you've got going on.
Yeah, I love what you're doing, Tim. I think, both of us found ourselves here, had to pivot a bit with what we see, but wherever you are, if you've had to make a change, then just jump into it and keep walking forward.
I love that. Yeah, that's to anybody listening. The word for 2020 was like pivot, wasn't it? But I mean, at the end of the day, like, it is the perspective that you can sometimes bring, and we hope that you're able to find any ways that you can learn. Jill's here. I'm sure love to answer any questions you have, and same here. Reach out. Thanks again.
Thank
Jill.
you, Tim.
So
good
good chatting.
Okay, see ya.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Justice Matters. I'd like to take this time to thank my audio-visual engineer, Jose Biotto, for your help in producing the show. I'd also like to shout out to the Patreon community that financially supports this podcast. Guys, thank you so much for your support. You can join them simply by going to patreon.com/Justice Matters, where a simple donation of $5 a month, you can become a part of the Patreon community and get access to behind-the-scenes content and extras that I share just with you. And lastly, there is another really important way that you can help support the podcast, and that's simply by rating it or leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, maybe by subscribing on YouTube. Yes, we are a video podcast as well. Guys, thank you so much for listening in to this episode of Justice Matters. Please come again soon. I can't wait to share more episodes with you. I'm your host, Tim Buxton. Thanks for listening.